And our main man, 95.7 The Game Insider, does a great job for the Athletic. Anthony Slater, hopefully he's getting a little R&R as the season is over, and I know he's done covering OKC. Anthony, good morning, brother. And we're going to talk a little Warriors here and some of the rumblings coming out from the Plus Minus podcast with UTK and Marcus Thompson. But, man, we lost the logo this morning, man. 86 years old, Jerry West. Any conversations you had with them? What comes to mind when I say the name Jerry West, an all-time champion, an all-time legend? But, what, it's not going to be easy to replace him and his leadership in this league.
A week after Bill Walton, too.
Yep.
It's just crazy. Yeah. My years covering the Warriors were like his final years with the Warriors. Got to know him a little bit. It was interesting being on the other side, and, you kind of mentioned in your lead-in, but, we don't know how much his phone call to Kevin Durant sealed Kevin Durant coming to the Warriors, but it certainly meant a lot to KD at the time. He may have come anyways. I can remember Andre Iguodala talking about when he came to the Warriors, which is viewed as kind of a pivotal move, like the influence of Jerry West, like joining the organization, like legitimized them in a lot of ways. He had his fingerprints on some of the biggest deals in the Warriors dynasty. And, we could sit here and talk about like how important he was to all that. But if you if his NBA book is, if the Warriors are just a chapter in his NBA book, it's like one of his like least important chapters, right? I mean,
Yep.
If you think about player exec with the Lakers, all the Lakers years and everything, coaching to Memphis, all that, it's crazy. I mean, and then obviously, I think everybody has said it, but the fact that he is and was the NBA logo kind of epitomizes what he made to the league, which is like everything in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really well said. And there's no easy way to transition for, one of the luminaries of basketball to current modern basketball. But we're going to have to try to do it. Anthony, you were on a podcast with TK and Marcus Thompson, and you had said this, and I want you to listen to the sound for the audience that maybe hasn't heard it. And then I have a question for you on the back end. So this is what you had said on the TK podcast.
It's fair if Klay's
he was pissed. He was pissed at him at the end of the season. There's no question. He was pissed at them at the end of the season. And
by the way, not very happy with upper management's dealing with his extension talks.
It's the whole thing.
Or non-dealing, I should say.
Yeah,
almost.
It's the whole thing. And I think he took offense when Draymond, not at Draymond, but that Draymond said, hey, look, they signed him to a 4-year, $180 million deal when he tore his ACL. And, Klay didn't love that. And it's like, hey, what were they going to do?
What were they going to do? You can imagine if they did
that was probably his most, he had a very interesting exit interview for several reasons, but that was probably the answer that was most revealing.
He had that.
So I guess my question to you is, from what you know and you can gather, how far back does Klay's frustration with Draymond stem?
I mean, as Tim even said in that podcast, and by the way, I think that was the first time I've been led into a question by listening to myself. That was a little.
You like that? It's like Inception.
Yeah. Do you like how you sound? Do you sound sexy, Anthony?
I don't know. We don't need to get. I mean, it's more the idea that, he owes the Warriors. Klay owes the Warriors because they gave him the contract they did at the time, and the fact that, and we, this has been a storyline for years that Klay, because he missed 2 seasons and got paid max money, owes something to the Warriors. And I mean, and you heard it in his exit interview answer, if people can remember it, but it's think about, it's kind of think about all I did for the organization all up until the moment that I tore my ACL in Game 6 of the finals. And I think he was kind of expressing frustration that it's even a topic that he owes them something because of what they did, way down the line. And yes, Draymond brought that up, and Draymond has a tendency to be very talkative, and still is. I know you guys talked yesterday about, what he said recently on the pool thing. I don't think it's some deeply directed at Draymond per se, and then I think it's more frustration with the idea of, that storyline and like he owes something to the Warriors this summer because of what happened in 2019.
Yeah. And that it's foolish to have that narrative regarding the contract extension, because everyone was going to give him that contract extension in the league. But what about his frustration, Klay's, with upper management regarding the contract extension? Is it about how it went down? Is it the amount of years, the money? What specifically is he frustrated with?
just don't think there was that much of a thirst or a desire to get something done. I mean, everybody knows kind of the 2 for $48 that was out there, and some people would think that was fair enough for him to sign at the time. Clearly, he didn't, from a years and financial standpoint, believe that was worth signing. We're talking preseason at this point, but it's just, I mean, all the way up until now, it's not necessarily that Klay Thompson has been priority number one. Locking down his future is not necessarily priority one for the Warriors. And you can, from a cold-hearted business perspective, I think you can understand that from the Warriors side. But, Klay Thompson is Klay Thompson. And, he has pride in what he's built with the Warriors, who he still is in the league, what his statistical resume still says he is. And I think there's a fair, you want to be prioritized. And I don't think necessarily, the Warriors management all the way up into the top has, from day one of this, they did with other people over the last couple of years, said, we have to do whatever it takes to make sure you're here long term.
Yeah, I've heard rumblings that maybe he's bothered because of the length, because you see Wiggins get a 4-year deal. You see Draymond get a 4-year deal, 3-year deals with player options, and obviously, those players may opt in because of the money on the back end of these deals, and he gets his 2 years. He's saying, well, what about me? Don't you want me to retire here? But moving on from Klay, just in terms of just money and play, you've been around a lot of NBA locker rooms over the last decade, Anthony, and from what I've been told by former players, current players, you just don't bring up somebody's money or their contract. And that where the Draymond Green says, hey, man, he got paid. That's what I thought about right away, Anthony, is where players just don't speak up on other people's money. And you mentioned how Draymond's been talkative. So what's your take on him rehashing the Jordan Poole situation with Kevon Looney, where it's well known that Kevon Looney was looked up to by Jordan Poole, considering that he's from Milwaukee and Poole's from Milwaukee and they were brothers. Didn't you find it kind of strange that he brought back up that situation in that season?
I mean, it's just kind of part of the package, right? that has been agreed too long ago. But, I mean, in that one, to me, that wasn't necessarily he's taking, subliminal shots at Jordan Poole, which I think there has been times in the past you're wondering if it was just kind of revealing, no, you know how bad the season was? It was even worse than you thought it was, which I was, again, I'm surprised he said all that. But, yeah, I mean, we all kind of knew that at the time. I mean, you guys even just following the season on a daily basis knew it was off. They even said how off it was publicly. But all it does is generates another news cycle of it. We shouldn't be talking about 2 years ago. We can talk about how bad last year was. That's more important because of they need to fix this summer. But I don't know. He generates news cycles. It probably got more eyeballs, more ears to his podcast and everything. So I don't know. It's just part of the pack.
It's part of the Draymond Green experience. I get that. Go ahead, Shaq.
No, but me and other Warrior fans, not all of them, everyone has various opinions. When you admit that out loud, I question, why is the organization riding with you till the wheels fall off?
Good. Very good at basketball.
I mean, is he? He missed 22 games this year, and you were the 10th seed.
But to Slater's point, he was good on Slater, I say that on the airways, and people start throwing tomatoes at me because my biggest problem with the whole Draymond Green experience is he is playing good basketball. You see the defensive prowess. You see the IQ. Now, do I want him to shoot the open shots more? Absolutely. But there is still value in the type of player that he is, and it's tough to see that. The casual, especially the fans, it's tough for them to see that because of the suspensions, the ejections, and all the talk on the podcast.
But all that is him not being on the floor, and then how that affects him, right? Last season, derailed early in the year because he wasn't out there, and then he comes back and suddenly their small ball lineup is exploding. His defensive rating's going crazy. They're winning games. Kuminga and Wiggins can play together. I don't know. I don't have the records in front of me, but when he was on the court, and particularly when he was in rhythm on the court, they were a 4 or 5 seed type, record. And him and Trace Jackson Davis late in the season formed a really good, kind of defensive pairing in the backcourt. And if you're of the belief that the entire experience is too much and there's, potentially a move on scenario, you probably said that, after the punch. You probably said that in the off season when they signed him 4 years for $100 million. The Warriors clearly wouldn't agree with you, considering the fact that they gave him a 4-year, $100 million extension. And they're of the belief, and they said it last year prior to free agency, that they are no longer in the contending conversation if he is not on the roster. Now, they weren't necessarily in the contending conversation last year. We'll see if they are next year. I think it matters what happens over the next month, obviously, but they just still want to win at the highest level, and they still believe they need him to do that.
All right, so there's a lot of different things happening here. Let's rat-a-tat-tat them as best we can for people that are out there. Chris Paul, the $30 million option. Are they going to try to work out some sort of an arrangement where they can extend the date, or will we find out by the end of June, one way or the other, either they're going to pick up that option or just allow it to go away? What do you think happens there?
That's like kind of in the next few weeks. They're trying to figure out the options there, what can and can't be done with it, what teams would be interested in it, what trades could possibly happen, Klay Thompson's future. I think it's a very big hint to either what kind of money Klay might be willing to come back for, or if they get the feeling Klay might just straight walk out the door and take that $43 million expiring down to zero, essentially, then I think you have a lot more of a thirst to either use all of Chris Paul's $30 million, or at least partially part of it, to go trade for a player, maybe attach a pick to it, or just basically guarantee it for Chris Paul, because you need that salary slot at some point to trade. If it's in June or if it's in February. I think they're both tied to each other. To one part of your question, which is the first part, could it get extended? From what I've heard, Chris Paul's been very open and understanding within it. He knows what contract he signed. He's as smart as it comes business wise in the league, and if it makes sense for both sides to suddenly make the guaranteed deadline, July 5th instead of June 28th, because it might get Chris Paul a whole lot of guaranteed money. I do think Chris Paul would be interested in that, because I think the last thing Chris Paul wants is for that $30 million to become a taxpayer mid-level minimum, whatever he would get if it gets released. If he says, if you tell Chris Paul, hey, hold on 10 days and you're probably going to get $30 million guaranteed, that's appealing to a Chris Paul. So it's possible he would work with them in that sense.
Anthony, what's your gut tell you about Klay? He's back or is he gone? When we reconvene in the first week of July, second week of July, will Klay Thompson be a member of the Golden State Warriors? Your thoughts, yes or no?
Yeah. So you're trying to pin me down with a yes or no. I
have to, Anthony. I have to, because my gut tells me he's not going to be back. But maybe
So I having a lot of conversations over the last couple months, and this goes back to how sour the ending was. I think there was definitely a feeling like, if let's say he had to make the decision 5 days after the season ended, I would have guessed no. I think a lot of people in that orbit were thinking it was kind of going that way. But there's definitely a feeling like the time, the conversations that need to happen, the conversations, by the way, that will happen over the next few weeks, which is him figuring out his market, him figuring out, the situations he would be going into, not only from a money perspective, from a year's perspective, but also from a role perspective, city perspective, lifestyle perspective. So absorbing what his options are, finally hearing whatever the final offer from the Warriors will be, whatever the best that they're willing to do, and then having the conversations he's going to need to have with Steph, with Draymond, with Steve Kerr, with whoever within the Warriors organization and around the Bay Area he needs to have, and then deciding does he want to leave his very comfortable home, NBA home, and geographical home. I still think it's going to be very tough for him to do, and the one thing people do say about Joe Lacob is at the end of the day, he usually does, up the money to the point that it will keep, the franchise legends around. He would have kept KD around if Durant was willing to. He had final offers to Bob Myers, if Myers was willing to say. He just paid Steve Kerr. That was kind of, thornier behind the scenes negotiations, but he ended up paying Steve Kerr big money. Draymond Green, he gave 4 for $100, which a lot of people say he maybe shouldn't have. So I still, if you had to pin me down on a yes or no, I still say yes, but it's a lot needs to happen, and a lot more conversations and negotiations need to happen over the next 3 weeks that could decide if it is a yes or a no.
What would that role be with the Warriors?
I think it's at least a willingness that he's coming off the bench. Steve Kerr even said it. I was surprised he was so public about it in his exit interview that he wants to play Klay less. And the fact that he said they need more shooting so he can play Klay less, right? Because, one of the appeals of Klay is you put him on the floor, you have better spacing. This team really lacks spacing when he's not on the floor.
Yep.
So probably in an ideal world, especially if we're talking about a 3-year Klay deal, it transitions into him in the 6-man role that he was pretty good in, the 6th, 7th, 8th man type role, where it is some nights 22 minutes and some nights 32. It's some nights take the night off. What did he play last year? 77 games?
Yeah, played the most games on the team.
Does he close every night?
Well, it depends on the game,
no,
right?
I mean, there was times last year he didn't, and that really frustrated him. What was crazy? Remember the night that, Draymond hit Nurkic in Phoenix?
Yep.
Klay did not close that night. That was the first time he didn't close. And, he was really frustrated about it. It got completely overlooked because, the season was crumbling around them. But, and that was the first night he did it. Everybody remembers the Brooklyn night when, remember, he did Guy Santos over him. And then the post-game interview. But, he's gone through that now. I think the one thing the Warriors, Steve Kerr, feels pretty good about it is there was at least somewhat of a transition this past season. He did accept a bench role for a large chunk of the season. He did, feel not closing. And that's, that would be what he would be coming back to with the Warriors. And by the way, that's probably what he would be going to elsewhere, right? Let's say in Orlando or Philadelphia, you're not guaranteed 35 minutes.
That's what I'm saying, Anthony. I don't think he's guaranteed to finish, and I think he understands that. I think there's a perception about Klay Thompson is that he's selfish and he's all about him. Now, I did hear about the Phoenix night, and it did get overshadowed by Draymond Green because I heard that night he was not happy at all. It was bad. It was worse than the Brooklyn situation at Barclays Center. Oh, real quick before we let you go, who's going to be assistant coach? I know the Warriors interviewed Darvin Ham. Is there anything on Frank Vogel? Are they going to fill, especially if Kenny Atkinson gets the job? I know he hasn't got one yet. Any rumblings on that, Anthony?
They've interviewed several, you can say, a few former head coaches, some higher profile names, but also Kenny Atkinson is going to Cleveland late this week. I think James Borrego's there now, but Kenny's going probably Thursday, Friday range to do the really big, in person, meet the organization type thing. And if he gets that Cavaliers job, I think, there's a lot that Steve Kerr needs to settle with or, I guess redo or figure out with his assistant coaching staff. If Kenny Atkinson does not get that job, and it still seems, it's very much up in the air, him, Borrego, there's some other names out there, then it's probably just one hire and, they need to figure out exactly, who they want to fit into that staff. But, something will happen, but I think it's just going to have to wait until after Atkinson doesn't get the Cleveland job, and we probably won't know that until the weekend or next week.
Draymond Green, the appeal with Draymond Green, real quick before we let you go. I know I keep saying this and I'm pushing this back and everybody's going to get mad at me here, but with Draymond Green on this basketball team, when we see all the podcasts and we saw the situation on Inside the NBA where the T-Wolves refused to go up to the set because Draymond was, very critical of Rudy Gobert and company. Are the Warriors still appealing around the league knowing that Draymond Green is here? Do people still want to – I know they want to play with Steph, but do they still want to play with Draymond Green? What are some of the things you heard about that, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a few players out there, if you're Yusuf Nurkic was a free agent and you're like, hey, Yusuf want to come and play? Maybe he might have some reservations. There's a few guys out there, I'm sure. Hey, maybe that wouldn't matter in a Kevin Durant chase. He suddenly became available for Phoenix. So, again, there's personal situations where maybe that would impact it, but generally, no. 96% of the league doesn't necessarily care. Chris Paul and Draymond Green hated each other. They traded for Chris Paul, and then they were on podcasts together talking about how they were top 5 favorite teammates they've ever had. And Draymond's, he's good. I mean, his teammates. I actually thought last season, from a behind the scenes leadership film room, building up the youngsters perspective. Once he got back from the suspension, building up Kuminga, I actually kind of thought he had a decent leadership season in a lot of ways. Now, look, we can take 2 steps back, look at the season as a whole, what happened with all the suspensions. That's not, then you would probably take that from an A to a C minus D. But there's still an appeal to who he is as a personality and what he can do in a locker room, how he can teach defense, how he can hold young guys accountable. But, it can go haywire at times. But I don't necessarily affects what you're talking. I don't think they're not able to make a trade or not able to sign X free agent because of him, unless you're talking about a specific player or person who might know.
Anthony, how's the kid? How's everything?
He's good. 14 months, going a little crazy at this point. But, we're going to hit a baseball game later this week, so I'm excited.
Giants Angels?
You don't want to know where I'm going because I feel like it's, you guys know where I live at this point. So
Triple
I
A.
don't want to say
River Cats.
Yeah.
River
Yeah,
Cats.
yeah, exactly. You're going to be the Sacramento A's next year. There's an MLB team coming this way. So.
They will be coming up there. I may have to come up there too for that. Judge going to Sacramento.
What did Fisher say? We can't wait to watch Aaron Judge like the tanks out of this AAA park. So I'm gonna go watch one of those, I think.
All right, Anthony. Take care, man. Thanks for the time as always.
All right, fellas.
Anthony Slater here on the morning.